Hey everyone, Tactics here, and in today's video we're looking at Protection Warriors in Shadowlands, including the new abilities they've gained, their talent situation, Legendaries, Covenant abilities, Soulbinds, Conduits, and how they are shaping up in raids and Mythic Plus. This is the second video of 6 that I am doing on all tank specs, and you can check out the Guardian video linked in the description below. With the release of Shadowlands recently announced to be November 24th, I'll be releasing guides for all the new dungeons coming with it as well, so keep an eye out for those. If you enjoy this video, please make sure you guys like and subscribe to be notified when I post more Warcraft content, and let's get right into it with how Prot Warriors were affected by the unpruning. To start off, Shattering Throw is making a return as a 3-minute cooldown that removes magical immunities and deals additional damage against absorbs. While mostly focused around PvP, there are some cases in dungeons where it can be useful. Alongside Shattering Throw, Warriors gained Challenging Shout, an AoE taunt on a 4-minute cooldown, which is another useful dungeon tool. Charge and Intercept were separated into 2 different abilities, with Prot Warriors having 1 use of each. In the less useful category, Prot Warriors also gained Whirlwind, which you likely won't even want on your bars, and they have access to Execute again as well, which is a great damage boost in raids when you aren't actively tanking, but outside of that isn't super useful as it does cost Rage. Prot Warriors also saw some notable changes to Revenge, which got a damage boost, its cooldown removed, and its rage cost reduced from 30 to 20. It was, however, soft target capped at 5 targets along with Thunderclap. Lastly, Avatar was removed from the global cooldown, which is a very welcome change. Moving on to talents, Warriors saw a huge shakeup in their rows with Shadowlands. Starting with the level 15 row, Impending Victory and Into the Fray have been moved, and in their place is Devastator and a new talent, War Machine, which causes your autos to generate 50% more rage and grant you 10 rage and 30% move speed on a kill. Punish also saw a great change, now allowing multiple debuffs to overlap, up to a cap of 15% damage reduction. In general, War Machine has been extremely lackluster, and in its current state I don't see it getting picked for any content. Devastator is the much better offensive option, and Punish is a much better defensive option, so it'll be between those two. Next up, we've got the level 25 row, which is similar to the old level 75 row, housing both Rumbling Earth and Stormbolt in place of Crackling Thunder and Bounding Stride, and having the familiar Double Time taking the place of the now removed Safeguard. Double Time is a great choice in certain raid fights if you need the extra mobility and don't have a use for stuns, but in Mythic Plus it will still be a choice between either putting out more shockwaves with Rumbling Earth or having a stun for a priority target in Stormbolt. The talent rearrangements continue with the level 30 row, with a buffed Booming Voice taking the place of Unstoppable Force, now providing 20% additional damage up from 15%. Best Serve Cold and Dragon Roar have also seen buffs on this row, with Best Serve Cold now always causing Revenge to deal 20% more damage, and causing it to deal 50% more damage when a free Revenge procs. And Dragon's Roar is now a 30-second cooldown, down from 35 seconds, generates 20 rage instead of 10, and no longer has a slow component but does critically strike for 3 times normal damage. Overall, Best Serve Cold gives great consistent damage. Booming Voice gives the best rage generation, especially with its interaction with one of the legendaries we'll talk about in the next section, and Dragon Roar is a nice little burst cooldown that can help with Snap Threat while also giving a little boost in rage. Overall, this talent row is pretty solid, and I think you'll see all talents used in different situations. In the level 35 row, we find where Crackling Thunder and Bounding Stride are in the tree. Alongside them is a reworked Menace, now knocking back all nearby enemies except your primary target and causing them to cower in fear for 15 seconds rather than flee. Crackling Thunder did see a small buff, now increasing the slow on Thunderclap by an additional 10%. I think Crackling Thunder and Bounding Stride are going to be the go-to talents on this row, for Mythic Plus and Raid respectively, as Menace definitely still feels a little lacking in comparison. Moving on to the level 40 row, a buffed Impending Victory finds itself next to Never Surrender and a buffed Indomitable. Impending Victory saw both a damage buff and healing increase from 20% max health up to 30%, and Indomitable now grants some self-healing equal to 1% of your max health per 10 rage spent. Right now, Indomitable is looking extremely strong as both a passive health increase and healing just for doing your rotation, giving warriors some much needed sustain. Never Surrender is still extremely weak and could use some attention. Impending Victory is definitely a better option now and could be good in Mythic Plus when it gets a lot of resets, but the passive strength of Indomitable tends to win out in most cases. Next, we've got the level 45 row, where Into the Fray, Unstoppable Force, and Ravager find themselves competing with each other. Into the Fray did see a nerf down to 2% haste per ally from 3%, making the cap 10% down from 15%, which is a fairly significant nerf. Unstoppable Force is unchanged and still a solid option to pump out stronger, more frequent thunderclaps during Avatar, but the real star of this row is the buffed Ravager. Ravager now lasts 12 seconds, up from 7, has a 45-second cooldown, down from 1 minute, and instead of increasing your parry by 35%, it generates 10 rage each time it deals damage, making it fantastic for rage generation. While it has been capped at 8 targets, it now also slowly follows the nearest enemy, which is also a great quality of life change. It's great in AoE situations such as Mythic Plus, and again, fantastic for rage generation, and now that the Thunderclap spam build is severely nerfed due to this talent rearrangement, Ravager could be the go-to talent on this row for Mythic Plus. It is important to note that Unstoppable Force does have some solid synergy still with other talents and a legendary, so it is by no means a dead talent. For raids, it will likely be a choice between Into the Fray and Ravager, depending on the fight. Last up, we have the level 50 row, where Bolster has taken the place of Ravager alongside Heavy Repercussions and a severely nerfed Anger Management, which no longer reduces the cooldowns of Demoralizing Shout or Last Stand. Heavy Repercussions now also causes Shield Slam to generate 3 additional rage, rather than having increased damage during Shield Block, which is a nice little rage generation buff. Bolster had a slight effect change, now granting you shield block effect instead of 100% block chance, which actually makes it a bit stronger thanks to the added benefits this effect provides. Overall, I think Anger Management is in a similar spot as Unstoppable Force, where it gains strength because of the synergies it has with other talents in a legendary, but on its own it doesn't have a ton of strength. Bolster is a great talent to reduce the gaps in your mitigation and will likely be the go-to in this row for those of you not wanting to run the Thunderclap spam build, though Heavy Repercussions is a solid talent as well and will scale extremely well into the expansion as warriors gain stats. Moving on, let's talk Legendaries. Prot warriors have a few different options when it comes to their legendary choice, depending on the content they're doing. Starting with the one good general legendary, Seismic Reverberation causes Revenge to hit its target an additional time for 40% damage if it hits 3 or more targets. This is entirely a DPS increase legendary, and it's great for Mythic Plus as you are often fighting 3 or more enemies at a time. When combined with the best served cold talent, Revenge deals an absolute ridiculous amount of damage, which is a nice boost when pushing keys. Unfortunately, this legendary doesn't have much use in raids and also doesn't provide any defensive benefit, but if Mythic Plus is your main goal, this is the best option to increase your damage. I did also want to briefly mention both Misshapen Mirror, the Spell Reflect legendary, as well as Vitality Sacrifice, the general tank legendary. These are 2 legendaries you might have heard of already, as they were previously quite strong. However, recent tuning on the beta has knocked these legendaries down a peg, and I wouldn't expect them to be chosen for either raids or Mythic Plus at this point. There is a chance Vitality Sacrifice gets used later on in the expansion, thanks to it giving you a % increase instead of a flat increase, but for Season 1 it's definitely lacking. In terms of spec-specific legendaries, we'll start with the 2 weaker options. I don't really see much use for Reprisal, which causes your Intervene to give you Ignore Pain and cause your next Revenge to cost no rage and deal 200% more damage. In general, you aren't going to get too much use out of this legendary, and an occasional free Ignore Pain and Revenge doesn't really have a high impact overall. Another weak legendary is Unbreakable Will, which causes Shield Wall to grant 50% of its effectiveness to your party members. While this could be used to cheat some extremely high damage mechanics when pushing higher Mythic Plus keys, the overall uptime and therefore value of this legendary is extremely low, especially in comparison to the next couple legendaries we're going to talk about. Starting with a solid raid legendary, we have the Wall, which causes Shield Slam to generate 5 additional rage and reduce the cooldown of Shield Wall by 5 seconds. Overall, this allows Shield Slam to provide a ton of rage, and when used alongside the many Shield Slam affecting talents such as Punish or Devastator and Heavy Repercussions, it causes Shield Slam to be a great source of rage, damage, and mitigation. Combined with the state of the other legendaries for Prot Warrior, this looks like it will be the go-to raiding legendary. Lastly, we've got the return of a familiar effect in Thunderlord, which causes Thunderclap to reduce the cooldown of Demoralizing Shout by 1.5 seconds per enemy hit up to 4.5 seconds per cast. This legendary allows you to have a fairly high uptime on Demo Shout in AoE situations, such as in Mythic Plus, and when combined with the booming voice talent, it provides Prot Warriors with a solid boost in rage generation and damage on top of the defensive benefits of having more Demo Shouts. With the cooldown reduction for Demo Shout no longer attached to anger management, this is the only way to lower its cooldown to gain a higher uptime and get more benefit from the booming voice talent. While this legendary doesn't provide the same damage of seismic reverberation, it does have both a rage generation and defensive upside that the Revenge legendary lacks, which I think will make it more favorable when pushing higher Mythic Plus keys. Next up, let's talk Covenant abilities and Soulbinds. Starting with the Kyrians, warriors gain the ability Spear of Bastion, which is a 1-minute cooldown that does an AoE in a small area and tethers all enemies in the location to that area for 4 seconds. It also deals pulsing AoE damage over the duration and instantly generates 25 rage. All Kyrians also gain access to Phial of Serenity, which heals for 20% of your max health and removes curses, diseases, poisons, and bleeds. These two abilities alone make Kyrian extremely valuable to warriors, as the spear deals a decent chunk of damage in both AoE and single target, and also provides a decent burst of rage on a short cooldown. Meanwhile, the Phial allows warriors to cleanse debuffs on them, most importantly bleeds, which is one of Prot's biggest weaknesses. And with bleeds being prevalent in both Mythic Plus and Castle Nathria, this will be extremely important to have. If we look at the Soulbinds, they aren't the absolute greatest for Prot warriors, but they aren't terrible either. Pelagos seems to be the best option, granting access to a mastery boost when using Spear of Bastion, which shares the same 1-minute cooldown. This is alright, though mastery isn't the most sought after stat for Prot warriors. He also provides a reduced cooldown on Phial when killing enemies, which is great for Mythic Plus, as well as a hit combo-like versatility buff, giving a total of 5% verse. Clea provides healing based on you and your group's critical strikes, which can be a bit random and lead to the ability overhealing. She does have a potentially interesting ability that renders you immune to curses, diseases, poisons, and bleeds for 8 seconds after using Phial, which may allow you to cheese certain boss fights in Mythic Plus and raids. She also grants a general crit buff based on nearby allies and enemies, but crit is a bit of a divisive stat, being decent in Mythic Plus but not so great in raids. Lastly, there's Mechanicos, who is definitely the weakest of the bunch for Prot, allowing you to summon a buddy after using 90 abilities, though he does do a knockback on arrival, which can be annoying if mistimed. He also can grant you the ability to have Phial automatically trigger below 35%, or knock back enemies, again, two things that can be quite annoying if not timed correctly. The first takes away your control over the ability, so if you want to save it for a certain debuff coming up and you accidentally trigger it early, it's very bad. The second could affect your mob control in dungeons, as again, if you're using it and you knock back the whole pack in front of you that you're tanking, it can cause problems for your DPS. Overall, I think Kyrian is the best option for Prot warriors in general, as it provides a solid damaging ability that is good in both dungeon and raids, that gives a decent rage boost on a short cooldown and enables kiting thanks to its tether. They also gain an extra potion for a panic button that has the potential to deal with one of their larger weaknesses in bleed effects. While they don't have the best Soulbinds, they are still decent, and when combined with the fantastic abilities, Kyrian is a solid choice. Moving on to Necrolords, all members gain Fleshcraft, a channeled ability that grants you an absorb shield that is stronger when used near dead enemies, and Warriors gain Conqueror's Banner, which is a 3-minute cooldown that grants max health and critical strike to you for up to 50 seconds and allies for 20 seconds. As I mentioned earlier, crit is a stat that is alright in Mythic Plus but not very good in raids. This is also a 3-minute cooldown that doesn't have too high of an impact in general for Prot, even if you're able to max out the uptime at about 28%. In general, these abilities are a bit lackluster for Prot, especially compared to the Kyrians, and as we'll see, the Soulbinds aren't too great either. Starting off with Merilith, Volatile Solvent allows you to gain small 6-minute stat buffs when you use Fleshcraft on enemies, depending on the type of the enemy they are. For example, humanoids grant 2% mastery, elementals grant 2% magic damage, and undead grant you a 5% max health self-heal when killing an enemy. While these can be nice little bonuses, this does mean you need to keep track of when and where you are using your Fleshcraft in order to get maximum benefit, and in some dungeons and raid fights you don't have an option, which could leave you stuck with effects that don't benefit you much. Continuing with mediocre effects, Merilith also causes Fleshcraft to make you immune to CC and grants you health regeneration during the channel and for 4 seconds after, which isn't really the most impactful. Lastly, he does provide a nice little absorb shield for 15% of your max health when falling below 50%, once every 30 seconds, which will do a nice amount of healing in both Raids and Mythic Plus, as it should proc quite often. Then we've got Amini, whose key ability Lead by Example is a primary stat buff to you and your allies tied to your class Covenant ability, which in Warrior's case is a 3-minute cooldown. Note that the duration scales with your ability's cooldown and will always have about a 16% uptime if you use your ability as soon as possible every time. Being tied to a 3-minute cooldown can be both good and bad, as it could allow you to line up the stat buff with your party members' 3-minute cooldowns for extra burst, but it won't be as consistent as other tank specs such as Guardian or Brewmaster. On top of this, he gives an uninspiring 5% health buff, which is tied to Fleshcraft, which has a 25% uptime if using Fleshcraft on cooldown, as well as a generally weak final row, with the only decent option being Gnashing Chompers for Mythic Plus, which provides a short stacking haste buff after defeating enemies. Finally, we've got Bonesmith, who provides a pseudo cheat death, allowing you to keep fighting at 50% effectiveness for 10 seconds. He also has a Thorns-like effect when taking melee damage, and the choice between another mediocre crit effect and a weak self-heal 6 seconds after defeating enemies that often becomes overhealing. In general, all these abilities are a bit lacking, better than Amini, but not great overall. With that said, I think Necrolords are currently the worst option for Prot, as both their Covenant abilities and Soulbinds are lacking for Raids and Mythic Plus. Next up, we have the Night Fae, who provide a decent mobility option in Soul Shape, which gives you a few blinks and a move speed increase, which is decent for both kiting in Mythic Plus and for additional mobility in Raids. The warrior ability is Ancient Aftershock, which is a 1.5 minute cooldown that knocks down enemies every 3 seconds for 12 seconds and deals some initial nature damage as well as pulsing nature damage over the duration. It also gives you 16 rage per target over 12 seconds, up to a maximum of 5 targets, which would give 80 rage over 12 seconds. In general, this is a very solid option for Mythic Plus, as it deals decent AoE damage, provides AoE CC which will reduce the damage you take, and gives you a steady stream of rage over the duration. In Raids it is less useful, as the rage generation in low target scenarios isn't great, and the knockdown portion doesn't affect a lot of bosses or boss mobs. If you look at their Soulbinds, we see some alright options. Naya has a 30-second mastery and max health buff tied to Ancient Aftershock, which would give it about a 33% uptime if used on cooldown, though again, mastery isn't the best stat for Prot warriors. She also has a few decent Mythic Plus options, one allowing you to reduce the cooldown of Soul Shape on kills, and another that allows you to interrupt and deal damage at the same time, though it is a 30-second dot, which diminishes its value a bit. Dreamweaver offers some better raid options, providing a cheat death in Pod Tender, though it doesn't work great in Mythic Plus as it requires your pod to be defended for 10 seconds in order to revive you. She also grants a versatility buff that bounces between yourself and 2 allies, as well as a haste buff, again tied to Ancient Aftershock, though this is also tied to an area which can cause it to lose value if movement is required. The final Soulbind is Corrin, who provides a 10% damage boost against targets above 75% HP and healing boost to targets below 35% HP. Overall, this damage doesn't matter very much in Raids, but is a nice bonus in Mythic Plus. He also has a choice between a couple strong defensive traits in Face Your Foes and Hold the Line, where the former causes your ability to decrease the damage done of targets in front of you by 3%, and the latter causes you to take 15% less physical damage after standing still for 5 seconds, though again this is punished by movement. Overall, the Night Fae abilities are solid for AoE, but not the greatest in lower target scenarios. In general, both the abilities and Soulbinds are outclassed by the Kyrians, though they aren't a terrible second option. Last up we have the Venthyr, who grant the Door of Shadows ability, which has proven to be a bit lackluster on beta, as well as Condemn, which replaces Execute, deals shadow damage, weakens the target preventing some of their damage against you, and can be used above 80% health on top of below 20% health. Overall, this ability is just not great for Prot, as dumping Rage on Executes is generally not something you want to do in Mythic Plus, or when actively tanking in Raids. Outside of giving you a slight single target damage boost in Raids, this isn't a great option. Looking at the Venthyr Soulbinds, it's unfortunate that the abilities aren't good, as they have some of the best options here for Prot. Nadia is fantastic in Mythic Plus, mostly thanks to Thrillseeker, a haste buff that procs faster on killing enemies, but she also provides a flat 20% buff to food, flask, and weapon enchant buffs, which is nothing to be scoffed at. Theotar provides a 12-second mastery buff about once per minute, provided you stand in the designated area for the entire duration. While this doesn't seem great, he can also provide a 100 to 200% increase in combat potion length, which can be a little RNG but still decent, or instead you can take a versatility buff tied to Condemn for yourself and 4 allies, which will have solid uptime in dungeons but likely won't be great in raid fights. Lastly, we've got Draven, who reduces damage taken below 40% health by 10%, which is absolutely fantastic for tanks on its own. But he also causes you to shatter on death, dealing 100% of your max health and damage and healing to nearby enemies and allies, which is a nice little bonus, though hopefully it doesn't happen too often. He also attaches an absorb shield to Door of Shadows equal to 15% of your max health, making it a little bit more useful outside of the niche situations. And he also grants you 10% increase to your stamina and 4% increase to your healing done if you stand still for 4 seconds. And this effect actually persists for 6 seconds after moving, so you don't need to stay stationary at all times to get the benefit. To conclude, the Venthyr have some of the best Soulbind options available to Prot Warriors, but unfortunately their abilities aren't great for tanking, and definitely drag them down below an option like the Kyrians. With Covenants done, let's move on to Conduits. Starting with the potency choices, each Covenant provides an option that buffs their respective class abilities, which tend to be quite strong. For Kyrian, this buffs the instant damage and rage generation of your spear by 25 to 67% depending on rank. For Necrolord, this causes you to gain 5 stacks immediately and also increase your strength by 10 to 24% for the 20-second duration. Nightface reduces the cooldown of Ancient Aftershock by 15 seconds and increases its damage by 4 to 32%, and Venthyr causes Condemns damage done and prevented to be increased by 1.5 to 2.9% per nearby enemy. Outside of these potency options, Prot Warriors have Show of Force and Ashen Juggernaut. Show of Force causes Revenge to increase the damage of your next Thunderclap by 12 to 29% depending on rank, which is a solid damage boost in AoE scenarios such as Mythic Plus. Ashen Juggernaut causes Execute to increase its own crit chance by 3 to 6%, stacking up to 8 times, which likely won't ever be used, as again Execute is usually not an ability you want to be pressing very often as it costs a decent chunk of rage. Outside of potency options, Prot Warriors have access to a few different finesse choices, namely Safeguard, Inspiring Presence, and Disturb the Peace. Safeguard attaches an 8 to 22% damage reduction to your target when you intervene them, which is basically acts like an external you can put on your co-tank at higher ranks in raid. Inspiring Presence grants a 20 to 48% increase to both Rallying Cry's health and buff duration, which can cause the mediocre defensive ability to get a bit more value. Finally, Disturb the Peace reduces the cooldown of Shockwave by 5 to 12 seconds, which is a nice little boost to the number of AoE stuns you can put out in Mythic Plus, especially when combined with the Rumbling Earth talent. Last up, we have the Endurance Conduits, where again, Prot Warriors have a few solid options. First, there's Fueled by Violence, which heals you for 15 to 36% of the damage dealt by your deep wounds, providing some nice passive healing that is especially strong in AoE situations. Stalwart Guardian reduces the cooldown of Shield Wall by 20 to 48 seconds, which is a decent amount and synergizes nicely with multiple legendaries and talents. Finally, Unnerving Focus increases your rage generation by 30 to 72% during Last Stand, which is really only decent when paired alongside Bolster for the lower cooldown on Last Stand, which results in a much higher uptime. Putting everything together, how do Prot Warriors look overall in both dungeons and raids? When it comes to Mythic Plus, Prot Warriors have definitely been knocked down a peg. Once the kings of BFA, Warriors are now on the outside looking in, at least for the start of the expansion. With the lower stat levels and the talent rearrangement heavily nerfing the Thunderclap spam build, Warriors feel much slower to play and deal significantly less damage. This combined with their lack of great utility means they won't be as prevalent in high keys as they once were in 8.3. I wouldn't be too worried though, as Warriors are notorious for their strong scaling, so while they may be one of the bottom tanks to start the X back out, it's unlikely they'll stay that way. It's unfortunately a similar story in raids, as they just don't bring the same damage or defensive capabilities as some of the other tanks. While they are strong against physical damage, they are lacking in both magic damage mitigation and bleed mitigation, which Castle Nathria is full of. And while Kyrian can help with some of the bleed problems, it doesn't solve the magic damage issue. Overall, these problems again leave them at or near the bottom of the tank heap. To conclude, Warriors are definitely paying for their BFA sins a bit at the beginning of Shadowlands, with a large talent tree rearrangement and having their damage severely hit by the target cap. In terms of Covenants, Kyrians are looking like the best option for pretty much all forms of content, thanks to Spear's solid damage and rage generation, as well as the bleed removal capabilities of File. Unfortunately, they aren't looking to be very good in the first tier, but their saving grace is their strong scaling, which will likely result in them jumping up the tank rankings as the expansion progresses and gear levels rise. But that is it for our in-depth discussion on Protection Warriors in Shadowlands. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure you like and subscribe to be notified when I post more Warcraft content. As I said at the beginning of the video, I'm currently working on videos for all the tank specs with the Guardian video already completed, so feel free to check it out, linked below. You can also follow me on Twitter for updates or check out my stream on Twitch, both at Tactics. Thank you all once again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.